Have you ever stopped to wonder why, in an age where the entire knowledge of humanity is just a few clicks away, people seem to be getting more shallow, more distracted, and let's be blunt, more stupid every single day? It's a disturbing paradox. We live surrounded by the greatest library ever created, yet most conversations sound emptier than ever. Scroll through social media and you'll see endless arguments, but rarely real thought. Headlines dominate attention while the truth, complex and nuanced, gets lost. Entertainment celebrates noise over wisdom, and people know more about celebrities' daily routines than about the structures of power shaping their own lives. We binge distractions, but struggle to read a single book without reaching for our phones. Doesn't it strike you as strange that while technology has made information universal, genuine wisdom has become almost extinct? Why is it that despite swimming in a sea of knowledge, we are dying of thirst when it comes to clarity and understanding? This is not just a casual observation, it's a warning. Philosophers from centuries past foresaw this moment, a time when humanity would trade depth for comfort, truth for convenience, reflection for distraction. And it's happening now, right before our eyes. So the question we must face is uncomfortable but urgent. Why is society becoming more stupid every day? And more importantly, what can we do about it before it's too late? Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you'll see that stupidity is not an inevitable fate, it is a choice. And so is wisdom. Before we continue, I invite you to join this community of seekers who refuse to drown in mediocrity. Hit the like button to support this message, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to receive the next video I release. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming, because together, we live in a time that previous generations could only dream of. With a small device in our hands, we have access to more knowledge than the greatest scholars of the past could ever hope to gather in a lifetime. The accumulated wisdom of philosophers, scientists, poets, and historians, all of it exists at our fingertips. And yet, paradoxically, never before has society felt so shallow, so confused, and so intellectually fragile. This contradiction is what I call the paradox of information. On the surface, we are drowning in knowledge, but in reality, we are starving for wisdom. The flood of data has not elevated our collective intelligence. Instead, it has eroded it. The ability to differentiate between truth and lies, substance and noise, has weakened to the point where entire societies stumble in confusion, unable to separate clarity from illusion. Think of your own daily life. How often do you spend time scrolling through endless feeds, bombarded by headlines, memes, and sound bites? And how much of it do you actually retain? More importantly, how much of it truly shapes you into a wiser, more reflective human being? Most of the time, we absorb content without digestion. We skim, we swipe, we consume. And in this race to consume everything, we understand nothing. This is not a random accident. Friedrich Nietzsche, in his prophetic critique of modernity, spoke of the last man. The last man is the archetype of a person who shuns depth, who fears struggle, who clings to comfort at all costs. He avoids great questions and lives only for small pleasures. Nietzsche warned that once society chose this path, it would descend into mediocrity, into a culture where convenience replaces wisdom. And isn't this eerily similar to what we see today? A society that prefers comfort over confrontation, noise over silence, and distraction over the pursuit of truth. The danger becomes even clearer when we examine how misinformation spreads in the digital age. A study by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology revealed something shocking. False news spreads significantly faster and farther on social media than verified facts. Why? Because lies are often crafted to be simple, sensational, and emotionally charged, while truth demands nuance, patience, and context. In a world addicted to speed, nuance becomes the first casualty, and without nuance, wisdom collapses. The consequences are everywhere. Public debates no longer revolve around reasoned arguments, but around outrage, slogans, and superficial judgments. People no longer ask, Is it true? But instead, is it popular, or worse, does it entertain me? In this cultural shift, the collective intelligence of society is quietly corroded. The tragedy is that this decline doesn't only affect individuals, it poisons entire communities. Politics devolves into tribal shouting matches. Education emphasizes test scores and rote memorization over deep understanding. Entertainment becomes the primary lens through which reality is filtered, reducing even the most serious issues into spectacles designed for consumption. And what happens when a culture forgets how to think deeply? It becomes vulnerable to manipulation, to authoritarian control, to collapse. The paradox of information is not simply that we have too much knowledge, but that we no longer know how to use it. This is where we stand today, a society that appears intelligent on the surface, but is increasingly hollow within. And unless we confront this paradox, the decline will only accelerate. In the next part, we will peel back the layers even further and examine why this is happening, not just culturally, but psychologically. Because the real reason society is becoming more stupid every day lies not in the abundance of information, but in how our minds are being trained to consume it. And once we understand that mechanism, we will see the hidden architecture of stupidity itself. To understand why society seems to be getting more stupid every day, we must go beyond surface-level observations. It is not enough to say people scroll too much or that entertainment is shallow. We must dissect the machinery behind this decline, how psychology, culture, politics, and education all converge to produce a perfect storm of intellectual decay. Stupidity today is not an accident. It is engineered, reinforced, and rewarded. The psychology of mental shortcuts. Daniel Kahneman's insight: human beings are not designed for constant deep thinking. As Daniel Kahneman explained in his groundbreaking work, Thinking, Fast and Slow, the mind operates through two systems. System 1, fast, instinctive, emotional. And System 2, slow, deliberate, analytical. Most of the time, we rely on System 1 because it conserves energy. It provides quick answers, even if they are simplistic or inaccurate. Now consider how modern life is structured. Social media thrives on headlines, memes, and short clips designed for instant reaction. Politicians speak in slogans because nuanced arguments don't go viral. Advertisers appeal to your fears and desires with emotional imagery rather than reason. In other words, the architecture of our society is built to trigger System 1 and suppress System 2. Thinking deeply feels increasingly unnatural. And when deep thought becomes rare, stupidity becomes normal. This is why people share articles without reading them, why conspiracy theories spread like wildfire, and why outrage dominates public discourse. Our brains are constantly nudged toward the lazy option, the easy answer, the instant emotion. Intelligence requires effort, but stupidity is effortless. And in a world of constant stimulation, effort is a dying art. The entertainment trap, Neil Postman's prophecy. Long before TikTok or Instagram existed, cultural critic Neil Postman warned us in Amusing Ourselves to Death that modern societies risk turning every domain of life into entertainment. Politics becomes theater, education becomes performance, religion becomes spectacle. The underlying logic is not truth, but attention. What captures the eye, not what enriches the soul. Look at the way news operates today. Complex issues are reduced to shouting matches between pundits. Important global crises are covered for a few seconds before the feed moves on to celebrity gossip. Even tragedies are consumed like episodes in a never-ending show. Postman argued that when everything becomes entertainment, the public loses its ability to distinguish seriousness from spectacle. We laugh, we rage, we scroll, but we rarely reflect. And this cultural shift has real consequences. When political leaders are judged by charisma rather than competence, when teachers must entertain students instead of challenging them, when spirituality is sold as self-help slogans, society loses its depth. Wisdom is drowned in spectacle. The politics of manufactured ignorance, Foucault and Chomsky ignorance, is not only widespread, it is useful. French philosopher Michel Foucault argued that power often works not through brute force, but through subtle systems of control shaping what people think about, how they behave, and even what they consider normal in our age. One of the most effective tools of control is distraction. Noam Chomsky sharpened this point when he said, "Propaganda is to democracy what violence is to dictatorship." In authoritarian regimes, people are silenced by fear. In modern democracies, people are pacified by entertainment, flooded with shallow debates, and overwhelmed by noise. The result is the same: a passive population incapable of challenging authority. Bread and circuses kept the Roman masses quiet while the empire decayed. Today, scrolling feeds, celebrity scandals, and viral dances serve the same function. When citizens are busy consuming distractions, they don't question corruption, inequality, or injustice. Stupidity becomes a form of political control. The collapse of education, from John Dewey to standardized testing. If education worked as it should, it would counteract these forces. True education, as philosopher John Dewey envisioned, was never about memorizing facts. He said, "Education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself." Its purpose was to cultivate curiosity, critical thought, and the courage to question. But in modern systems, education often reinforces passivity. Schools are dominated by standardized tests, rote memorization, and rigid curricula. Students are trained to perform, not to think. They learn how to provide the correct answer, not how to ask the difficult question. Creativity is stifled, originality punished, and curiosity ignored. The result is a generation highly skilled at following instructions, but ill-prepared for independent thought. They can recite formulas but cannot interpret reality. They can pass exams but cannot solve real-world problems. In this sense, education is no longer the antidote to stupidity, it is part of its machinery. The perfect storm of decline. When we combine these elements, the picture is clear. Psychology pushes us toward mental shortcuts. Culture rewards entertainment over truth. Politics exploits ignorance as a tool of control. Education conditions conformity instead of thought. This is the architecture of stupidity. It explains why societies with access to infinite knowledge still choose ignorance, why entire populations scroll endlessly without reflecting, why outrage spreads faster than reason, and why people mistake confidence for competence. What makes this decline even more dangerous is its invisibility. People don't realize they are being made stupid. They feel informed because they consume endless data. They feel engaged because they react constantly online. But in truth, they are trapped in a cycle of shallow thinking. The tragedy is not just ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. And this illusion, left unchecked, threatens not only individual lives, but the survival of entire civilizations. Which brings us to the next stage of our journey, the consequences. What happens when societies can no longer think deeply? What happens when noise replaces wisdom and when stupidity becomes a cultural norm? The answers are sobering, and they may determine the fate of our future. If stupidity were just an individual failing, its effects would be tragic but limited. Yet when stupidity becomes systemic, when it spreads across culture, politics, education, and media, the consequences are catastrophic. A society that loses its ability to think deeply is not just less intelligent. It is more fragile, more divided, and more easily manipulated. Let us confront these consequences directly, because they reveal just how dangerous this decline truly is. The death of independent thought. The first and most obvious consequence is the erosion of independent thinking. When people are trained to consume content passively, to accept headlines without questioning, and to react emotionally instead of reflecting rationally, they lose the ability to form authentic judgments. Instead of cultivating their own ideas, they outsource their beliefs to algorithms, influencers, and ideologies. Consider how debates unfold in public spaces today. People argue passionately online, yet their arguments often echo soundbites, memes, or slogans they've absorbed from elsewhere. Rarely do we encounter original reflection. And because nuance is sacrificed for certainty, discussions become polarized, shallow, and hostile. The marketplace of ideas, once meant to sharpen thought, now functions as an echo chamber that amplifies noise. Carl Jung once warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The same is true for societies. When collective ignorance is left unexamined, it dictates the destiny of nations. Stupidity, unchallenged, becomes the fate of civilizations. Politics reduced to theater. When critical thought weakens, politics devolves into performance. Leaders no longer need to persuade with reason. They only need to entertain or enrage. Elections become spectacles dominated by personality over policy, by slogans over substance. The crowd cheers or boos, but rarely reflects. This is not new. The Roman poet Juvenal once described how emperors kept citizens pacified with bread and circuses. The same strategy is alive today. Politicians feed the public distractions, outrage, and emotional theater, while deeper systemic issues, inequality, corruption, environmental collapse remain unresolved. A society addicted to shallow entertainment will always choose charisma over competence, and in doing so, it paves the way for manipulation. Culture drowning in noise. Beyond politics, the very fabric of culture is at risk. When stupidity dominates, the profound becomes irrelevant. Wisdom keepers, the philosophers, poets, spiritual teachers, are overshadowed by influencers whose only qualification is the ability to capture attention. Public discourse shifts from reflection to reaction, from dialogue to shouting matches. The rise of noise over depth transforms how we value truth itself. Truth is slow, complex, and often uncomfortable. Noise, by contrast, is immediate, simple, and emotionally charged. And in a culture addicted to speed, truth loses its power. The loudest voice replaces the wisest voice. Fame is mistaken for wisdom. Popularity becomes the only measure of value. The collective vulnerability of ignorance. Perhaps the most dangerous consequence is collective vulnerability. A society that cannot think critically becomes easy prey for manipulation by corporations, by political leaders, by media systems that thrive on distraction. Misinformation spreads unchecked because people lack the patience to question it. Division deepens because tribal slogans are easier to rally behind than complex truths. This collective vulnerability has real-world costs. Democracies weaken when citizens are unable to engage in reasoned debate. Justice falters when outrage replaces careful deliberation. And civilizations risk collapse when their people prefer distraction to responsibility. The silent collapse of civilization. The decline of intelligence is not dramatic at first. It begins quietly, almost invisibly. Citizens laugh at memes instead of reading books. Leaders speak in slogans instead of policies. Teachers prepare students for tests instead of life. Over time, wisdom becomes rare, and stupidity becomes the cultural default. By the time the consequences are visible, it may be too late. History is full of civilizations that collapsed not because of external enemies, but because of internal decay. And in every case, the seeds of collapse were planted in the collective failure to think deeply, to see clearly, to act wisely. Carl Jung's warning echoes here. What we fail to make conscious will control us. If societies remain unconscious of their own stupidity, they will call decline their fate. But fate is not inevitable, it is simply the name we give to the consequences of neglect. This is where we stand today, at a crossroads between unconscious decline and conscious renewal. And the choice depends not on leaders, corporations, or algorithms alone, it depends on each of us. In the next part, we will explore what that renewal looks like. We will examine the path of resistance against stupidity, the practices of reflection, questioning, and courage that can help us reclaim our minds. Because if stupidity is engineered, then so is wisdom. The question is, which will you choose? Up until now, we have painted a bleak picture, a society drowning in noise, manipulated by distraction, seduced by entertainment, and crippled by its own intellectual laziness. Yet despair is not the purpose of this reflection. The very fact that we can recognize this decline means that the seeds of renewal already exist. Stupidity may be engineered, but wisdom can be chosen. The path out of this crisis begins not with mass movements or political revolutions, but with individuals who dare to live differently. The courage to question. Socrates' example. The ancient philosopher Socrates built his life on one simple but radical practice: relentless questioning. Instead of accepting beliefs handed down by society, he asked, "Why do you believe this? Who benefits from you believing it? What evidence supports it?" Socrates understood that the mind grows sharper through dialogue, not dogma. Imagine what would happen if modern citizens adopted the same stance. Instead of absorbing headlines passively, we would ask, what's the source? What's the hidden agenda? What am I not being told? Such questioning cuts through the fog of misinformation and forces us to confront reality rather than illusions. Socrates died for his commitment to truth, but his example remains urgent. Wisdom begins with the courage to question. Sapere ad Kant's call to enlightenment centuries later. The philosopher Immanuel Kant summarized the essence of renewal in 2 words: sapere ad, dare to know. For Kant, enlightenment meant the courage to use one's own reason without relying blindly on authority. It meant standing apart from the herd, resisting the comfort of conformity, and daring to think independently. This is the challenge for us today. It is far easier to follow trends, repost memes, and repeat slogans than to confront the discomfort of independent thought. But if society is to rise above stupidity, it requires individuals willing to embrace the difficulty of thinking for themselves. Renewal is not the path of ease. It is the path of courage. Practices of depth in an age of distraction. If stupidity spreads through habits of distraction, then intelligence must be cultivated through habits of depth. This is not an abstract ideal. It is a discipline, a daily practice. Here are 3 essential practices. Deep reading. In an era of shallow skimming, the act of sitting with a book, wrestling with complex ideas, and allowing one's mind to stretch is revolutionary. Read not just for information, but for transformation. Challenge yourself with works that resist easy answers: philosophy, literature, history. These texts slow you down, strengthen the muscle of patience, and remind you that wisdom cannot be rushed. Meaningful dialogue. Human beings grow wiser in community, but only when that community values truth over ego. Genuine dialogue requires humility, the willingness to listen deeply, to consider perspectives that challenge us, and to respond thoughtfully rather than react defensively. Philosopher Martin Buber spoke of the I-thou relationship, where we encounter the other not as an object to defeat, but as a subject to understand. If society recovered this sacred form of dialogue, our collective intelligence would rise. The power of silence. Søren Kierkegaard warned that the constant noise of society prevents us from knowing ourselves. In our time, silence is almost revolutionary. To reclaim moments of stillness without screens, without distractions, is to rediscover the capacity to think, to reflect, and to reconnect with our inner depths. Silence creates the space where true thought can emerge. Resistance as freedom renewal requires more than personal habits. It requires the recognition that these practices are acts of resistance. In a society designed to keep us distracted, the simple act of slowing down to reflect is an act of defiance. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, reminded us that between stimulus and response lies a space. In that space is our power to choose, and in our choice lies our growth and our freedom. Every time we resist the urge to scroll mindlessly, every time we pause before reacting, every time we choose depth over distraction, we are reclaiming that space. And in reclaiming it, we rediscover our freedom. From individuals to culture, some may argue, but what difference can one person make against the tide of stupidity? History offers the answer. Wisdom has never belonged to the majority. It has always been preserved by the few who dared to live differently. Socrates, Galileo, Martin Luther King Jr. each stood against the tide of their time, and their courage reshaped the future. Renewal begins with individuals, but it does not end there. When enough people choose wisdom over noise, depth over distraction, a cultural shift becomes possible. Just as stupidity is contagious, so is wisdom. Every act of reflection, every question asked, every dialogue engaged in creates ripples that spread outward. The road ahead, the path of renewal, is not glamorous. It does not offer instant gratification. It requires discipline, humility, and courage. But it is the only path that leads out of the swamp of mediocrity and into the clarity of true thought. If society is to recover its intelligence, it will not happen by accident. It will happen because individuals choose, every day, to resist the easy path of distraction and to walk the harder path of wisdom. This is the challenge that lies before us. Will we remain passive consumers of noise, or will we reclaim our role as seekers of truth? The answer to that question will determine not only our personal lives, but the fate of our civilization. In the final part, we will confront this choice directly. We will see that stupidity is not fate, but a decision made collectively, day by day. And just as societies have chosen decline, so too can they choose renewal. We have traveled through a difficult but necessary landscape. We have seen how society, despite its infinite access to information, is becoming more stupid every day. We have traced the paradox of knowledge without wisdom, dissected the causes rooted in psychology, culture, politics, and education, and confronted the grim consequences of this decline. And finally, we have explored the path of renewal, the personal and collective practices that can help us rise above the fog of mediocrity. But now we must face the most important truth of all. Collective stupidity is not destiny, it is a choice. And just as decline is a choice repeated day after day, so too is renewal. Stupidity is easy, wisdom is courageous. Stupidity thrives because it is comfortable. It asks nothing of us but passivity. It promises quick answers, emotional thrills, and the illusion of certainty. It lulls us into distraction and convinces us that entertainment is enough. Wisdom, by contrast, is difficult. It requires effort, patience, and courage. It asks us to pause when others rush, to question when others conform, to reflect when others react. It strips away illusions and confronts us with uncomfortable truths. Wisdom is not popular, but it is powerful. And in every age, it has been the minority, those few who dared to resist the tide, that preserved the flame of clarity for future generations. The call of history. Think about it. Socrates was condemned to death for questioning his society. Galileo was silenced for speaking truths that threatened authority. Martin Luther King Jr. was persecuted for daring to dream of justice in a divided world. In every era, the masses preferred comfort over truth, distraction over depth, ignorance over awareness. Yet it was the courage of a few that kept wisdom alive. We stand at a similar crossroads. The forces that profit from stupidity, corporations, political systems, media industries, are powerful, but they are not invincible. Their power depends on our compliance, on our willingness to surrender thought for distraction. The moment enough individuals reclaim their minds, the entire structure begins to tremble. The choice before you. So I ask you directly, which path will you choose? Will you drift with the current of distraction, surrendering your mind to the endless noise that surrounds you? Or will you dare to resist, to think, to reflect, to live with the courage of those who stood apart from the crowd? The greatest danger is not that society is getting dumber, it is that you may accept it as inevitable. The true tragedy is not the noise outside, but the silence inside, the surrender of your own capacity to question, to reflect, to rise above. Do not let that silence define you. Do not allow mediocrity to claim your future. Remember, stupidity is a habit, but so is wisdom. One leads to decay, the other to renewal. One leads to manipulation, the other to freedom. One leads to darkness, the other to light. The final question, so here's the question I leave you with, the one only you can answer. Do you want to be part of a society that sinks into stupidity? Or do you want to be one of the few who keeps the flame of wisdom alive? History is written not by the majority, but by the courageous minority. Will you be among them? If this message resonated with you, don't let it stop here. Support this work by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on the notification bell so you'll be the first to receive future content. Share this with someone you care about, someone who you believe is ready to awaken from the fog of distraction. And in the comments, tell me, what part of this video challenged you the most? What insight spoke directly to you? Together, we can resist the tide of mediocrity. Together, we can reclaim wisdom in an age of noise. And together, we can prove that stupidity is not our fate unless we choose it.